that is what you saw. I mean, it looked like you could walk across it.
Homeowners living in Coral Shores in Manatee County say they're stuck dealing with clusters of decomposing fish. Red tide sweeping southwest Florida's coast, killing sea life.
What's happening, guys? Mike here, and I am giving you one more video of what's going on with the algae bloom, the red tide. In this video I wanted to address a few issues. My first video that I posted about this red tide bloom was on June 29th. The red tide bloom had been here for about a week. World famous for tar fishing, especially in the month of June. Look at Grand Pass as it goes down. That's for good reason. We're coming up on 90 days of red tide at this point. There's a lot of business people that are getting desperate, that are starting to try to mislead people, saying that the water's clean and the red tide is gone. As far as the things that I'm not a big fan of is places like Sanibel Island, for instance. They shoveled, I believe they removed 267 tons of dead marine life from their beaches alone, okay? 267 tons. And then a few days later, they put out an article in a local newspaper saying that they're open for business and the water is clean and safe. Their beaches are clean and it's safe to swim in excellent conditions for beachgoers. Raking a beach does not get rid of red tide. Just saying. Just this morning I was on social media and someone shared an article about a group of business owners on Bradenton Beach. They're saying that they're not experiencing anything.
The visuals that folks are seeing online and social media isn't reality.
Bullshit.
It's not what we're experiencing here.
Bullshit.
The birds are flying, there's fish jumping around.
Bullshit.
People are out on jet skis. We have folks running and walking on the beach like they normally do.
Why would you lie to your customers? Why would you lie to the public? All you're doing is you're creating animosity between the business and the consumer. If it's panic mode, call it desperate. I call it desperate. But whatever the case, lying to your customers and lying to your clientele does not solve anything. That segment that the Suncoast News ran did not help anybody. It didn't help the business owners of Bradenton Beach's image. It didn't help bring customers to, it didn't help bring more customers to Bradenton Beach. It definitely didn't do that. I think there is a positive, group of business owners banding together, trying to figure out how to weather the storm. Fine, that's one thing, but you shouldn't have let the people who talked, who did the interviews, that should have never been aired. I mean, that was terrible on the part of Suncoast News for airing that sort of ignorance. It makes it look like they'll say anything to bring business in, and even resort to lying and definitely, I mean, because look, August 14th, the Bradenton Herald posts this.
We can't fish right now inshore. We can't, all this is dead. All your mullet, all your sand brim, everything's dead. This is the worst I've ever seen. I've been here for 34 years.
2 days later, the Suncoast News releases this debacle.
The visuals that folks are seeing online and social media isn't reality. It's not what we're experiencing here. The birds are flying, there's fish jumping around.
We're standing here outside and experiencing no symptoms today. We've been out here cleaning our beaches with beach rakes sometimes 4 times a day. So we're kind of proud, in a way, of the efforts that we're making along these shores to keep the beach fish population, dead fish population, under control.
We can breathe, we can eat, we're open for business, and we are, we're happy to be here.
What's the truth? You've got fishermen and homeowners that are in dire straits in their canals of Bradenton, but then you've got business owners in that same town, in that same area, on those same canals, saying everything's fine. I mean, common sense, people. I mean, seriously. The big question, the big problem that is going on right now. We all know by now, I mean, unless you're living under a rock or in Alaska, you know by now that red tide forms naturally. It's not man-made, okay? And it's, guess what? Ding, ding, ding. It's not green algae. Everyone knows that. Red tide is not green algae. They're not the same, blah, blah, blah. So we know that red tide forms offshore, sometimes 20 to 40 miles, okay? Now, when red tide comes into shore, that's when man takes over. That's when human pollution takes over and blows it up. Red tide is like a flame. You feed the red tide fire with Lake Okeechobee runoff, with fertilizer pollution. Nutrient-rich pollution feeds the red tide flame, makes it expand, makes it bigger. That's where humans come into play with red tide. Red tide is natural. What is happening right now is a human problem. I'm not going to get into it in this video, but if anybody cares to look it up, everyone should look up the Clean Water Act of 1977. It's pretty easy. All you got to do is Google it. Everything about the Clean Water Act of 1977 is being ignored. The government came up with the law. The government amended the law. The government is ignoring the law. For the people out there that don't understand that why is the government responsible, this is a natural occurrence, blah, 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 blah. The government is breaking their own law. Being that the government is ignoring their own law, which is the Clean Water Act of 1977, they're also breaking their own laws of endangered species, of harming protected species like dolphins, like sea turtles, your Kemp's Ridley sea turtles, your loggerhead sea turtles, your whale sharks, your manatees, your snooks, all of them, sharks, all your protected species are being killed essentially by an entity that is breaking its own laws. That's why. That's it. I mean, there's no other way to say it. That is where the government comes into play. That is where your political leaders come into play. So now I want to go over, let's go over Band-Aids. Let's go over things that can detour algae. We could treat the lake with copper sulfate. Copper sulfate is used to control algae. It doesn't seem like it has a lot of side effects. There's a lot of technical mumbo jumbo that goes into copper sulfate that, again, I'm not going to get into here. If you're interested in what copper sulfate can do to algae and what it does, side effects and whatever, you can Google that as well. Google is a wonderful tool. Captain Planet. A lot of you see Captain Planet's videos floating around Facebook. He's talking about the duckweed greenhouses. Duckweed is a invasive plant. It does filter the algae and basically cleans the water naturally. It does spread pretty quick, so what he was saying was do floating greenhouses. Of course, all of that is if the water, I believe, if the water is going to flow south, which that in itself is a whole nother issue, you know, a whole nother set of politics with Big Sugar. Duckweed greenhouses is definitely something that can be implemented as well. There's an ingredient in Roundup, weed killer, called glyphosate. We could definitely help out by banning glyphosate. A main food source for algae. Things that could be implemented is ultrasonic devices, ultrasonic generators. I believe Moat and a few other laboratories have came up with some kind of an ultrasonic generator that can disperse frequencies to I don't know if it kills or basically forms some sort of like a shield against, you know, the red tides and all the algae. Not really super detailed on what that is, of how it works, but it kind of explains itself. I mean, ultrasonic generators, they put out sound and there's a certain frequency that detours the algae. So Google that if you want. That is another proposed sort. I'd say that's more like a band-aid than anything. Nanobubbles, a generator that basically, I believe, that would pump the bottom of the water, bring it to the top, create bubbles, create more oxygen. To me, that seems like it would just fight and help replenish the water with oxygen. So even though there's red tide present, there is still a lot more oxygen present. It seems like that would be a band-aid. So nanobubbles, band-aid. Ultrasonic devices, more than likely a band-aid. Banning glyphosate, that would help, maybe a band-aid. Duckweed filters, that only works if the water's flowing south, I believe. I mean, I don't know. That one's a tough one. Storm drain facilities right at the discharge areas to treat the water out of the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie. All of these things are great ideas. You know, there's a massive amount of government-owned land just south of Lake Okeechobee that has been funded to basically dig a reservoir to store water. That definitely would help, but it doesn't solve the problem. The only way to solve the problem is to restore the natural flow and send the water south. But at the same time, there is so many people in Florida at this point that there needs to be things implemented to help clean that water, to help the sawgrasses and help your duckweeds, and I think help out with that natural filter effect before it gets to the choking Everglades. And that is a whole nother story right there, is the Everglades that are dying right now because they're needing that water to come south. And that's where big sugar politics and big farm politics come into play. What it all boils down to is one thing: August 28th. I would get on bullsugar.org, get on your websites and find out what government officials are for clean water. Vote water on August 28th.